Hi, this is James Headley. Welcome back to the Living in Savannah channel. Today I wanted to take a look at the sales within the landings on Skidaway Island going back to the beginning of this year. So back to January 1st. When I compiled this data just about a day or so ago, there were 196 of those sales, and I'm going to break it down in a little different way than I do in my monthly updates. I think there's some interesting data in here that might be of use to both buyers and sellers, but particularly to those on the former side of that. Definitely some actionable data, I think, in here for buyers to think about when they are thinking about purchasing a home here in Skidaway. Before I do dive into that, let me say that I really appreciate those of you who have subscribed, those who have shared with friends or like-minded folks who might be interested in real estate here in the landings and on Skidaway more broadly. And I appreciate you continuing to do that, and certainly liking the videos that you do enjoy and take something away from. So please do continue to do that, and thanks so much for that. So of those 196 sales, 86 of those were sales that were situations where both the buyer and the seller were represented by the same broker. So not quite half, but a very, not too far off of half. Since I haven't seen numbers like that anywhere else I've lived before moving to my forever home here in the landings, I wanted to see if there was anything that we could take away from that data. So what did I find, and what do those numbers reveal? First, it really depends on your perspective to some extent, but as a starting point, I think we can say that there is not as much variability in some of the key numbers as one might expect. For example, whether looking at the mean or the median, the eventual sales price of a home as a ratio to the original listing price was within a couple tenths of a percentage point, whether the buyer and seller were represented by the same broker or by different brokers. In other words, sellers could expect to get, on average, 2 to 3% less than what they originally listed their homes for, regardless of which brokerage represented the buyer of their home. When we look at another aspect of pricing, dollars per square foot, there is a little more variability. The median closing price per square foot was $10 higher when both the seller and buyer were represented by the same broker. At $284 and $274 per square foot, respectively. When you consider that the median landings home is around 3,000 square feet, this does translate to a meaningful average of an extra $30,000 to sellers, even if that difference of $10 doesn't sound like a lot initially. So this number actually yields the first practical takeaway in the data for me. Again, on average, if you are a buyer, you are likely going to be able to negotiate a better price for your home purchase if you are represented by a different broker than the one that is listing the home. When we look at the number of days spent actively on the market before going to contract, this seems to shed further light on that last point. In cases where both the buyer and seller were represented by the same brokerage, homes stayed on the market an average of 28 days versus 44 days when the buyer was represented by a different broker. Turning to the arguably more meaningful metric of median days on the market, the contrast is actually even greater, with the numbers being 6 days versus 33 days. Now, that's good for sellers who want to quickly move their home, yes, but maybe not so much for buyers seeking equal negotiating footing. To test that out further, I took a look at the median selling price in dollars per square foot for homes that were on the market for 0 to 3 days and 0 to 7 days. And they were nearly identical at $290 and $289 per square foot, respectively. Now, homes that stayed active for more than a week sold for $273 a square foot. But what about when those homes were sold by the same broker versus different ones? Well, for homes staying on the market a week or less, the median selling price per square foot was $290 when both sides of the transaction were handled by the same broker versus $281 when the sides had different representation. Now, that $9 gap actually spread to $11, $270 versus $281, when looking at homes that were on the market for more than a week. A bunch of numbers, right? So I appreciate you hanging with me through this deep dive into the first 3 quarters and change of this year's sales and the landings. I'm happy to discuss the numbers further with you one-to-one anytime, and of course to discuss your particular real estate needs. But the most consistent takeaway for me from these nearly 200 sales is that if I were a buyer today, I would lean heavily toward using a realtor from a different brokerage than the one representing the seller. So you can see that in the data, figure on average, again, depending upon how we look at it, and pretty much in any way that we look at it, it's about a $30,000 difference on average for the buyer. So that's it for today. Thanks again for tuning in, liking, subscribing, and sharing, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode.